Hey guys, it's Ted Bogert. Welcome back to the Ted Show. Last Monday of the year, if you can think about that. It's kind of crazy. I hope everybody had a great Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, whatever it is you celebrate, a holiday. I hope you all had a great one. I'm so excited to have David Green, back on the show with me in a completely different role, completely different time in his life. He's outdressed me today, which is really awesome. Looking great, Dave.
Thanks,
Dave's with Otter PR, and we're going to talk about 7 secrets for startups to use when you want to boost your brand via public relations. So welcome, Dave. How are you?
Hey, Ted. Doing great. Thanks for having me again.
I'm so excited when I saw that you made a shift. Obviously, so many people did during 2020.
Yeah.
You made a shift. And I thought, God, this is the perfect thing for him because you are you've always been charismatic and forward thinking in the way that you approach things in the nonprofit world. So I have no doubt in my mind that all of those great skills you have are helpful in the for-profit world, the business world. So give them a little background, though, on you. People who might not know Dave Green, tell them a little bit about you.
Yeah. So, at heart, I really love to help people, and that motivates me no matter what. And whether I'm in the for-profit world or nonprofit world, it still comes from a place in my heart that I really just want to try to help people any chance that I have. And of course, I had the opportunity to do that in the humanitarian sector for about 10 years with various organizations and addressing poverty and community transformation and hunger and a number of different issues. But now I'm in a position where in the for-profit world, I have the opportunity to volunteer my time to help people to advance their causes and also, of course, commit resources. But whether it's, financial or just from a strategy standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from a PR standpoint, anything that I can do to help, I get passionate about those causes.
It's obvious. It was obvious to me because I met you when you were in the nonprofit world. Obvious to me that you had. Sometimes it is an amazing thing that you can do once you step away from there because you now know both sides of the world, the nonprofit and the for-profit, and you can see the behind the scenes of the things that you can get done on the for-profit side for the nonprofit side. So I love it. I think it's an amazing transition you've made. So we had tons of people message me after I posted the title for this, the 7 secrets. And I know that we're going to talk about startups, but for a lot of businesses, 2020 has been a startup year. They left their jobs, whether they wanted to or not. They followed their dreams. They got forced into a different career or a different way of thinking or a different mode of making money. And so I think it's on everyone's mind how they can better serve what they're trying to accomplish, whatever their purpose is. So I'm going to let you take a deep dive and tell us about the 7 secrets. Maybe give us a little background on where you came up with this idea.
Yeah, well, one of the things I've observed is like you mentioned, so many people had their careers disrupted during the pandemic. And there's this unique, where certain industries, like some actually thrived and others had to make adjustments. But what I found is that there's this revolution, this entrepreneurial revolution happening because of the pandemic that maybe it got sped up a little bit, but there's a whole new generation of entrepreneurs that are Etsy entrepreneurs and Shopify entrepreneurs and people who said, how do I take my skills and abilities and my unique personality? How do I create a business out of that can thrive? Really out of necessity, but what people have found is they're actually doing pretty well with those businesses that they've started. And so now they're trying to figure out, how do I get to the next level? Like, how do I take this thing that started as a fallback option? How do I take this now that I'm really pursuing my dream and take it to another level?
And it is on everyone's mind. Before you even came up with this topic, before we even talked about you coming back on the show, people ask me all the time, hey, Ted, I finally made that leap you've been talking about on the show for 3 years. I finally took that chance. I finally got outside my comfort zone. Now I'm happy there, but I want to move on, like you said, to the next level. And so there's so many different answers to that, guys. But what Dave's going to do is kind of give us 7 secrets that he knows can help you. So go right into it, my friend.
So
I'm sitting here listening just like everybody else is. I'm fascinated by this.
The first one is return on energy, right? And people look at for their startup, how do I spend my time? How do I spend my money? They're both are limited resources in startup mode. And PR is a way to really balance things out, right? So with advertising, and advertising has a role to play, especially in digital businesses. But at the end of the day, when your ad budget runs out, the impact of the ad budget ends at the same time. And so there, you have to have a really tight return on investment from that ad revenue or from that ad work. On the other side with PR, it's more about return on energy, right? So if you do a big PR push and you're able to get your brand out there, you're able to establish yourself as a thought leader, at your brand, providing a very specific solution within a noisy industry, right? And you get media attention with that, you get your name out there. Not only do you help your SEO for the long term, so as the stories live out there, people are being driven back to your brand when they search. But at the same time, you create entire new audiences that are interested in your product, in your service, in you as an entrepreneur, as a leader. And so when we think about like, should I do PR? The very first thing is comparing that return on investment to return on energy. And as an entrepreneur in startup mode, you want to really put your time into things that are going to pay long-term dividends, and PR is a great way to do that. So that's the first secret, right? Is evaluating your return on energy versus return on investment.
And sometimes that's not an immediate tangible. And I want to encourage people that you shouldn't expect it to be an immediate tangible. It's your energy, like Dave said, but just because you I'm going to post my first post on social media. I'm going to do my first thing, and you get 3 likes. That doesn't necessarily mean you haven't made an impact. It just doesn't mean that somebody's going to cut you $1 million check right there.
Yeah, that's so true. It's about building a brand over the long term, and PR has a cumulative effect. So it's a lot of work that goes into building a foundation, and then what people see is then that one story that gets you national attention. But there was a lot of work that led up to that point. So
all right, number 2.
The next one is you may or may not see that, but the flashcard method, right? So the flashcard method is very important to telling your story, because when you get the attention of media, when you get the attention of your customers, you better have a good story to tell, right? And so the flashcard method is something I recommend people go through if they haven't done it yet. But you basically start with the 60-minute version of your story. Imagine you were going to tell your story in 60 minutes. Well, you can talk about just about anything in 60 minutes. So you take sort of like your top, 7 to 10 themes that you would talk about in an hour-long speech. Then you take and you go, all right, what if I only had 30 minutes? Which things would I have to condense or eliminate? Then what if I only had 15 minutes, 5 minutes? And you get all the way down to, what if all I could say is what I can write on this flashcard? What would my story be, right? And basically the process, forcing yourself to go through that and filtering your story down to a flashcard, it ultimately creates a very compelling story where you're talking about only the most important things about your brand, about your personal story, the things that are going to relate the most for your customers. And so like, you have to be able to tell your story, right? So that's another one of the secrets. First you have to understand the return on energy. The next part is you have to have the right story to tell and condense it down. The third
Condensing is so important. And guys, that doesn't mean that you write a novel on one flashcard. The whole exercise is to condense it down, because a lot of the fluff is not as motivating and inspiring as you think it is. And so if you can make it more compelling, I love that word, Dave, compelling. It's more compelling as you fine tune it and bring it into a way that people can receive. Because people like to receive that kind of information. You going on and on for an hour might sound like an amazing thing because you talked for an hour, but that's not necessarily going to capture the audience that you want.
Right. So the next one is very exciting, and I call this the cupcake method, right? So,
nice.
And this is a real cupcake with pink icing. You got the white cake, you got the pink icing, the sprinkles, some blue icing, white, and a cherry on top, right? And what does that have to do with PR? Well, it has to do with sort of the format that really is important to follow if you're going to get the attention of media, right? There's 3 layers to it. So the first part is like the cake, it has to be relevant and timely, right? And so that cake is important because without that cake, there would be no full cupcake, right? And so it's the foundation for everything, timely and relevant. If your story that you're trying to break to the media happened a year ago, that's not timely or relevant anymore. So it has to be something that's timely and relevant. The next part is it has to be unique, right? And icing, if we went and looked at 100 different cupcakes, the icing is going to be different on all of them, different shapes, different colors, different flavors. This one even has the, multicolored, and you've got sprinkles in it, right? It's got to be a unique story, right? So if you go to the media, and although you have something that's timely, it's the same thing that 8 million other companies or 8 million other entrepreneurs would be telling media in the same day. There's not really anything unique about that, right? So timely and unique are the first two components. And the last part is it has to be controversial, right? And so when you see this one, it's topped with a cherry. I would have to imagine there's some people out there that love cherries. Cherries are like one of their favorite things to eat. They put a cherry on top of anything that they possibly could. There's other people who hate cherries, right? And would say, I don't really like all that icing. I don't really like the cherry on top. I want different toppings. It's a topic that people can have a lot of opinions about, right? That's the key. Doesn't necessarily mean it's negative, but controversial just means people have a ton of opinions. So your story that you bring to media, it has to have those three components. It's got to be timely and relevant. It's got to be unique. And then there's got to be some element to it that's controversial that people can have a lot of opinions about.
I love that. I love what you said. Guys, it doesn't have to, controversial doesn't mean negative. It means having lots of opinions when we're talking about PR startups. It does not have to be, all right, you're going to take this just to get attention. You definitely want to believe in what you're putting out there. And the controversy isn't necessarily what you're causing. It just happens to be the topic has a lot of opinions, like Dave said. I think people equate controversy with negative. Oh, it's got to be against the grain. It doesn't always have to be against the grain. And you certainly don't want to go into it with a negative approach.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you're a media outlet, it helps you to be able to tell stories that people can have a lot of opinions about, because those are the topics that are going to generate the most interest. At the end of the day, we do have to understand that media is also a business. And so it's their job to generate a multitude of different opinions and interests around a specific topic. So the more you can build that cupcake for them and hand that to them, the more successful you'll be at getting your story published in media outlets. Yes. So next up is creating the news, right? So creating the news can be important for a lot of companies when you've gone through the exercise of creating your story, you've gone through the exercise of trying to figure out how to make it timely and unique and controversial, and you find yourself at a place where you say, gosh, like, I just don't feel like it's compelling enough. If you're feeling that in your instinct, then basically what you need to do is come up with a strategy to actually create the news, right? And there's a ton of different ways that people can create the news, but pick your favorite charity, right? Pick your favorite nonprofit that you care about, right? And one for me is I care a lot about fighting human trafficking. I also care a lot about girls' empowerment around the world. And so come up with a strategy with your brand to do some type of wild promotional stunt where you have a product or your service is going to in some way help people who
Dave, you're there you go.
Oh, there we go.
We couldn't hear that a little bit.
So a good example is I have a client that had a one-of-a-kind $50,000 purse that was created by an artisan in Ethiopia. This just incredible purse that she's going to sell for $50,000, and that she's doing a big media campaign around it. But that $50,000 purse is going to go. All of the proceeds are going to go to a charity called Girl Effect that empowers girls around the world to understand that they have education and entrepreneurship opportunities. And the charity made a difference in this particular person's life. And it's part of the reason why she has a fashion brand today is that they inspired her on her journey. So you create the news, right? By having this $50,000 purse and this compelling story behind why that one-of-a-kind purse is 50 grand. It gives you a reason to have something that's newsworthy, where a fashion brand that could maybe be seen as just another fashion brand, startup fashion brand otherwise, now they have a story that would warrant national attention, right? So sometimes you have to create the news to make the news.
I love that. And I think a lot of people are afraid because creating the news seems like it would be a scary thing. But all you're doing is you're creating buzz. I mean, that's a big word. You're creating the buzz around it. You're creating this, and you're affiliated with this positive thought, this I'm raising money for. And there's a lot of ways that you can use that. I try to encourage people to utilize their passion for whatever cause or whoever they're trying to empower as part of their brand identity.
Yeah, definitely. So next up, and I'll go fast through these next few to be respectful of our time, but next
You're
up
good.
is be kind. So I say be kind because consider when you're reaching out to journalists that there's half the journalists that there were, 5, 10 years ago, and they have twice as much work that they had. And there's so much vitriol directed towards journalists today. And so don't be another person that makes their day harder. Be someone who encourages them, be kind. Understand that not every journalist is going to have time today to cover your story, but maybe they'll have an angle 6 months from now, right? But just be respectful of their time, be respectful of the work that they do, be kind to them, and you'll find that that goes a lot further than if you come across as frustrated or impatient or overly assertive that your story is the best story ever. It's really a time to be kind to journalists if you want to have results.
Amen. Amen. Love it.
The next one, this comes up a lot, which is press releases, right? Should I do press releases or not? And my answer to that is yes, no, right? And so press releases have, they can be a really negative thing or they can be a really positive thing. It depends on your situation. For instance, I talked to a company last week that has, they actually have been in business for about 110 years in LA. And they've never had any media coverage ever because they're sort of a brand that made art supplies that were wholesale. But they're kind of going through this COVID startup mode thing that you mentioned, where the fifth generation owner of the company has made this big pivot, and it's way more consumer artist oriented with their products. And they have this really amazing story and collaborations, but it's never been written about anywhere. And so for them, doing a press release would actually be very harmful because they're sitting on a gold mine of a story right now because of the legacy of the company and their collaborations and partnerships and success during the pandemic. So it's better for them to go to a journalist and offer an exclusive, right? Because if you do a press release and it ends up getting picked up a bunch of smaller outlets, then you sort of hurt your chances at an exclusive with a really big media outlet, right? So in that case, you're better to hold off on the press release. First, go out directly to journalists, emailing, contacting directly to try to get your story told. If it's a really compelling story, don't send a press release. Start with the journalist first and go to one journalist at your wish list media outlet and start from there and be patient, right? Because it's worth it if you have a compelling story. The other side of that is, let's say that you don't have some story that is that, front page material of LA Times type thing, but you really need to get your story out there and you really need to help your SEO. Great, do a press release, because most of the modern press release services are going to get you search engine optimized. They're going to get your press release republished across hundreds of websites, which would be great for your SEO. In the press release, you can use links back to your site. You can use messaging specific to your brand that maybe you wouldn't normally to be able to get into journalistic stories, but it's really, really helpful for brand building and growing your story following. And then sometimes when you do a press release, journalists actually pick that up and want to write about it, and they'll contact you, right? So it can be helpful in some situations and it can be harmful in others. So you have to kind of decide what's best for your brand.
Yes, I love that. I think people fear press releases a little bit just for those reasons you said. They're not exactly sure when to release it, who to release it to, when's the best time, what's the right topic. And so it's very important that you weigh those out. I love that. I haven't heard that before. It's great.
Yeah. And then the last thing of our 7 is to take a 360-degree approach. So what I find, especially with startups, is they have a little bit of success and they're like, how do I get to that next level? I think I need to do a big PR push and get our story out there. But you have to take a 360-degree approach. And what that means is, consider your web platform first, right? Consider your social media channels, right? And it's really important that you kind of plan and go, all right, let's plan for what if I got national media attention, somehow, some way, my story went viral, I got tons of attention. All the people in the country that could be my customers, or all the people in the world went to my website in the next 90 days. Would they find the right website that also effectively communicated the brand and the messaging? Would they have functional issues. I tried to buy the product and the website kept crashing. Those are things to consider ahead of time. Social media, are they finding a totally different story and brand image on social media versus what they read about in this story in the New York Times, right? And so having that 360-degree approach and waiting to do PR until the website is at a certain level of functionality and brand image, social media is a certain point of brand image established, waiting till all of that's done, and then doing PR as kind of the last leg to then amplify everything that you've been building. But that 360-degree approach is really, really important. I had a client last week that they wanted to do a huge push on this new software that they had launched. But when I went to their website, no software anywhere it wasn't even on there, right? And then their social media, it wasn't listed. And so they're gonna have a really tough time having a journalist carry the story. But then let's say they had some success and they got the story out there. When potential customers went to their website and their social media, they'd be frustrated because they wouldn't even have found the software that was talked about in the media push that they wanted to do. So those are really important considerations. Always look at a 360-degree view of all of your digital platform to make sure it's in alignment with your media strategy.
It's so critical. I'll coach. I do a lot of nonprofit community work, and so nonprofits I'll use for an example. They want to do a big push, but they don't have a working website, a Facebook page. There is no place. They want to come on the show, and I'm like, fantastic. Who do I tag? Where do I send them to? Well, I've got an email. You have to be ready for that growth. You have to have your everything in place. It doesn't have to be perfect necessarily, but if you're going to drive people somewhere, there has to be something for them to look at that, like Dave said, so critical, that relates back to what your press release is or what your social media is saying. It's so bad when you haven't grown with that growth. If you're there and you're ready, make sure you're ready to take in what's coming to you. I mean, isn't that the whole point of you putting out a press release or putting out stuff on social media or trying to grow your brand? You want to drive people to something, but that something has to be ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Spot on. And if if you sell a product and your sort of product lead generation systems and your funnel, if you will, of, people open a shopping cart but don't finish that, or they decide to purchase, can you upsell? Like if you don't have all of that stuff built out, retargeting ads even for social media, if you don't have all of that built out, then you're going to lose some of the return that you would have had from your PR effort. So yeah, it's so important to have that up front.
I love it. I think this is so important. Not just, I know we said startups and people who have pivoted, but I think there are a lot of longer term businesses like your firm, like your art supply firm. You're in LA, where you're rethinking what you're doing. You're trying to reach a broader audience, and a lot of people are in that mode of what are some of the things I can do, because old ways may work to a certain degree, but in the new world, you have to have new ways, or at least refine the ways that you've been reaching people. Those 7 are awesome, Dave.
Definitely.
That's great stuff. See, even I learned.
Great.
You can teach an old dog, a very old dog.
I hope it's helpful for everybody.
All right. So how do people reach you? I have otterpr.com. I hope that website's correct. It's scrolling across the bottom. What's the best way for people to reach out? They want to learn more. Yep. Maybe they want to engage you as part of their PR plan.
Yeah, so contact us through otterpr.com, or you can find me on social media. Dave Green on LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect on social media. And I'm easy to find. If you just search Dave Green, I'll come up as one of the first few people there.
Fantastic. What a joy. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's some invaluable stuff, you guys, that we got today. I appreciate everything you're doing. It's amazing, Dave. And I wish you the best in 2021. Hopefully you'll come back and share more of your wisdom with us. It's always a joy to have you on the show.
Definitely. It's an honor to be on and a joy. So thank you. And yeah, same to you. Have a wonderful 2021 start to the year, and everybody listening, have a great start to the year as well.
Amen. Happy New Year, everybody. All right, Dave Green, otterpr.com. You guys reach out to him. He's amazing. He's just as kind and nice in person and when you talk to him as he is on the show. So thank you, Dave. We'll talk to you guys soon. See you later, everybody.